Good morning, everybody. It's January 3rd, 2012. And today's topic is how to choose a trumpet teacher. And many of us are continuing to learn. In fact, any trumpet player worth his or her salt is continuing to improve. We never really get to that finish line, do we? So we're always looking for people to help us to play a little better, or a lot better, as the case may be. So I thought I'd trace the history of my trumpet teachers and how it is that I came about to study with them. And so I started off, I think in junior high school with a fellow named Gordon Smith, who was at that time second trumpet in the Detroit Symphony, a wonderful trumpet player and a wonderful teacher. And I ended up studying with him because he taught at a local music store, and it was relatively close to home, and my parents were pretty good about knowing that if the fellow played in the Detroit Symphony, he must be pretty good. Later on, I was fortunate enough to be able to play in the section with Gordon as a substitute fourth trumpet in the Detroit Symphony for a summer season, and as extra trumpet with Detroit once in a while. So that was nice. Gordon was great, fundamentals. And after studying with Gordon, I ended up going to the Interlochen Arts Academy, where I was very fortunate my first year at Interlochen to have Clifford Lilia as a trumpet teacher. Clifford Lilia is a famous name to many trumpet players in the world today. He had some wonderful books and published by Balquhidder now, formerly published by Carl Fisher. But he was just a great fundamentals teacher and just one heck of a nice guy. Just I really loved him. He was like a second father to me in many ways. He went to all the concerts that I played in, I think almost all of them, when I was at University of Michigan, and I played in a lot of concerts. Great for fundamentals. I just happened to luck out. I went to Interlochen Arts Academy. But just prior to that, I almost forgot. I studied with Gordon Matthey in 1963, summer music camp at Interlochen. And he was also great. I remember listening to him play the characteristic studies. And wow, I said, okay, that was really, I don't think I can still play it as good as Gordon did, the second characteristic study. So from then, as I said, I went to Interlochen. The first year I studied with Clifford Lilia. The second year was with Ray Lichtenwalter, and from what I remember, it was a continuation of working on the basics. And also a fine trumpet teacher I happened to go to Interlochen for the second year, and that's who was teaching at that time. I think it got to be too much of a drive for Clifford Lilia. But it was a great experience at Interlochen with those two teachers. Then I went to University of Michigan. I enjoyed studying with Cliff Lilia so much that I ended up working with Cliff. And I really only had two schools at that time that I wanted to go to. One was Ohio Wesleyan, because I thought I was thinking about a pre-med career, pre-med or medical career. I would have studied pre-med there. And the other one was University of Michigan, and I was fortunate to get into both schools and decided to go to Michigan. Did not regret that at all. When I graduated from Michigan, I had to decide where to go to graduate school. I auditioned for it. It was at that time that the Vietnam War was raging. And so I auditioned for both the West Point Band and the Air Force Band in Washington in 1969, and I was very fortunate again to get into both of those groups. And they were just some of the top groups of that day in the military bands. And I decided I'd go to the Air Force Band in Washington and passed my first physical, and I proceeded to flunk my second physical simply because I needed some pills in case I got migraine headaches. And the doctor said, "Why do you have to take the pills?" And I told him why, and he said, "Well, we can't let you go in if you have to take pills." And I said, "But you got to let me go in. I'm going to play in the Air Force Band in Washington." And at that time he said, I'll never forget these infamous words. He said, "Kid, if you give me any more shit, I'll send you over to the Marines." So not knowing what was going on, I figured I better shut up. And that was the end of my military career. Probably the military is better off, I'm not sure. But I know I would have had a good time playing in the Air Force Band. And I had already made, actually, a move to get my master's degree at Catholic University and study with Sam Krause, who had played first trumpet in the Philadelphia Orchestra. But that didn't work out, so I had to scramble to find something to do, and I had just played an audition for Armando Gattallo when the Boston Symphony came to visit Ann Arbor, And I called up Gatala and I said, told him the situation, and he said, come on over. I got my 5 students, but I can take one more. And so I was very fortunate, got into Boston University at the last minute and studied with Gatala for a year, and that was fabulous. He really changed my sound around and concept, I think, of playing, and did as much by listening to him as anything else. He was such a fine player. So after 1 year at BU, I got to visit my parents who had just moved to Los Angeles. And at that time, it was really beautiful in Los Angeles in December and freezing cold back in Boston. And so I decided I'm moving to Los Angeles, where I enrolled at USC and just happened to have a teacher there by the name of Jimmy Stamp. And little did I know what a great teacher he was until I got there. And working with Jimmy was wonderful. He was just very encouraging. He was one of those teachers similar to Clifford Lilia that brought out the best in your playing. And so I was very fortunate to do that. But just I also studied one summer with John Kleiman. I asked around and people said, John Kleiman's a great teacher. You all got to study with him. So I went to John Kleiman, and he was first trumpet, I think, at either MGM or Fox. But his big hero was Harry Glantz. And so I studied with John Kleiman for a while, and he's another one of these great studio players, great players. And he was hard, but he was good. And I know Dave Washburn, I think, out here also studied with John Kleiman. There are a few people that have studied with him. So in any case, I studied with John Kleiman and Jimmy Stamp. And after that, I figured, okay, maybe I could, if I could possibly get in a few lessons with Tom Stevens. And he was reluctant to take new students, but I was very fortunate to be able to study with Tom. And I learned a great deal. I learned from Tom about the high levels of playing that are expected if you're going to be a true artist, and the kind of demands he placed on himself and on his students. And then after studying with Tom, I worked with Claude Gordon, because he had a lot of success with players, commercial players, especially upper register and endurance. So I thought that would be a fun thing to do. So that's how I ended up taking lessons with Claude. Claude would see students at that time once every other week. He had such a busy schedule and such a long waiting list. I saw him once every other week. He would write out 2 lessons, and so I had a different lesson each week, even though I saw Claude only once every other week. And I think after that, I took a few lessons with various people, such as Harry Kim for help on the Caruso, and Bob on the Arnold Jacobs breathing. And so I took a few lessons here and there with other people. And also during this whole time in Los Angeles, for many years anyway, I would hang out with Manny Klein, who was perhaps the greatest trumpet player and studio player of his era. And he had studied with Harry Glantz. And Manny was just one of these people who you learned by listening. And so I got to hang with Manny and many of the great artists of that day. It was like Mecca for trumpet players. Seemed like any trumpet player that would stop by, play in Los Angeles, and many of the studio players, everybody from Billy May, you name it, to the Candoli brothers, Johnny Audino. These are all studio players in Los Angeles. So I got a chance to hang with those guys. So that's how I ended up with different trumpet teachers. Some of it was serendipitous, and some of it was quite focused. I really wanted to work with this person because I knew what they had to offer. As in the case of Gatala, I had heard his recordings. I just thought they were so beautiful. I was fortunate to be able to get into his studio. So maybe that will give you some help as to how you might decide on choosing a trumpet teacher. Ideally, it's one that can inspire you, that will motivate you to practice, that can do the things that you'd like to do as a performer and as a player. And even in the case of Clifford Lilia, by the time I studied with him, he was no longer playing, but he clearly had a wonderful concept of how to play. So I think most of the people that I've studied with have been players. Not all players are great teachers, and not all teachers are great players. But it's nice when you can find a combination of both. That's it for today. Went a little bit long, but I'd studied with a lot of people, so I needed to talk about them. That's it. Take care. Hope you have a great day, and don't forget to keep blowing. Bye-bye.